Hey, welcome back to the Unbelievable Podcast. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we've got a Minnesota sports Chuck show for you, starting with the Vikings, of course, who we tend to feature the most prominently in this show. We'll break down the Thursday night victory. We actually seems like we haven't talked to you guys in a while, but it's just because the Vikings played last Thursday. So we'll talk a little bit about that and break down some of the things that have kind of unfolded since then and where the Vikings are headed with Kansas City next week. Then we'll also talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves, and by we, I mean Drew. We'll talk about the Timberwolves, and I'll help. And then we'll catch you up to speed on the Minnesota Wild if you've been paying attention to them at all. I'll give you a kind of how dedicated you need to be to this Wild season and some important factors there. So that is the game plan for today's show. I'm a little sick, so I apologize in advance for any weird noises that I make throughout the show. All right, then let's hop into the Vikings then. Let's do that. Let's get this out of the way first. Since it has been a while, I'll give you the quick recap. The recap actually makes sense for this show for the first time. The Vikings won 19-9 was the final score last Thursday against the Redskins. Skins got 3 field goals, although they were able to move the ball up the field a little bit more efficiently, primarily during that second quarter. Vikings get 1 touchdown from Dalvin Cook, who has another outstanding football performance, and then kind of cruise throughout the second half. I feel like they literally did not throw the ball in the second half. And Cousins threw another gem, although it did not include any touchdowns, but everything else was beautiful. So that's basically what happened in about 60 minutes. On a much more intricate level, Drew, let's break down this performance by Cousins. He finishes 23 of 26, 285, 11 yards per attempt, no interceptions, no touchdowns. What did you think in his quote revenge game against Washington?
Well, he didn't miss a throw. I mean, straight up,
Yeah.
He didn't, because of the 26 throws, he had 2 throwaways.
Right.
And then he had a screen pass to Dalvin Cook that hit him right in the hands and fell to the ground. And then the other 23 passes were completed.
That's correct.
He literally did not miss a throw. In terms of accuracy, in terms of poise, nothing changed from the prior 3 weeks. I think the only difference in terms of the offense scoring, I think, was a couple times in the red zone where like a penalty or a mistake by the offense kind of forced things into like a second or third and long, and from there the Vikings kind of played it safe and went for 3, which you can agree or disagree from that standpoint, but I think the larger issue or concern from that point is just that a couple penalties kept the Vikings out of the end zone. I think a couple around maybe outline, but overall the Vikings moved the ball extremely well once again, very efficient, and then defensively, I think the concern was the secondary a little bit early on when Keenum was in the game. He seemed to be moving the ball a lot easier than I would have expected. But then when Haskins went in the game second half, they didn't have the ball a lot in the second half, but when they did, it was pretty they didn't move the ball very much. Anthony Harris got the interception, and that was kind of the second half was a lot more of what we expected, at least from the defense.
Absolutely. I think that you hit it on the nose with Cousins. He was basically perfect. The stat sheet might not show it given the opponent. Like there will probably be people who look at this game at the end of the season, see Washington's record, and see that Cousins didn't even manage to throw a touchdown in this game, let alone surpass 300 yards, and they'll find some way to nitpick it. But ultimately, he was outstanding. He moved the ball up and down the field, did everything he's supposed to do as a quarterback, and then he let Dalvin Cook do his thing. And Dalvin Cook was outstanding once again, both as a receiver and a rusher, 160 plus yards overall, scrimmage yards. He's currently leading in that category, by the way, in the NFL. He's also leading in rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. I'm sure that Christian McCaffrey will catch up when he ends up playing, when they end up evening on the amount of games played between the two. But for now, Dalvin Cook is the best running back in the NFL statistically, and by from my eye, my perspective of watching, all Vikings games at least once, and then red zone, he looks like the best running back in the NFL too. So that's where the offense stands. Stephon Diggs has a bit of a fumbling issue, I suppose, maybe.
That's weird, by the way, because he entered the season with 1 fumble ever, and it was his very first game.
And now he's got
in
4
professional football, and I think it's 4 games in a row now, or 4 out of 5 games or something he's fumbled. So that's a little bit concerning, but I don't know if that's just kind of the luck of the draw. Like, it's more of a coincidence rather than something that's actually, should be noted as a trend. But either way, that's a bit of a concern. But again, like you said, Dalvin Cook is wheeling and dealing right now, and he gets another really good matchup this week against the Chiefs team that gave up like 1,000 yards to Jamal Williams and Aaron Jones this week.
Yeah. So speaking of concerning, I think there's 2 players specifically that we need to have a little bit of a talk about, being Pat Elflein and Xavier Rhodes. I'm sure anyone that follows Vikings Twitter or listens to local radio or reads the local newspaper, those are the 2 guys right now that everyone has an issue with. So let's start with Elflein, because I think that his discussion is a little bit more simple, I suppose. So Elflein, his problem is in pass protection, almost exclusively, for the record. He's actually been very good as a run blocker, and this is a run-first offense. So we do have to take that into account. The other things that we need to account for here are the possible replacements. So, as I said, if you've been keeping an eye on Pat Elflein, or at least been listening to the opinions expressed around the state of Minnesota, he has been probably the greatest liability on the Vikings offense, at least over the last 4 weeks. He's accruing penalties at a ridiculous rate, specifically holding that are, Drew mentioned, are taking the Vikings out of touchdown range sometimes or killing drives altogether. And he's also allowing interior pressure. There have been a couple of times where he literally has just let guys just bypass him just on strength alone. He does not look like the guy the Vikings drafted. He does not look like he's the same guy since there was he suffered that injury. He just overall it doesn't seem like he was ever able to fully rebound from the injury because he wasn't able to put on enough weight. During that off season, he was focused on rehab. So there's a real concern there, but the only options are Hunter Dozier, who has been wildly inconsistent himself, and Brett Jones, who people have different opinions on.
Neither Dozier and Jones are not better than Elflein in terms of left guard options there. It's just, you're not going to find 5 perfect offensive linemen. I think, and for what it's worth, I think some of the penalties that Elflein was called for in that game were a little ticky-tack, like could have been left alone. And I think I did see that Pro Football Focus noted the same type of thing. Because his grade was actually pretty solid for that game. It was like 76 or 77. And I think it was because they disagreed with some of the penalty calls, and they just didn't really penalize Elflein's grade for it. So I think, like you said, the run blocking is fine. The pass blocking is where the concern is. But when you do have, I think the other 4 linemen have been stepping up for the most part in pass protection.
Especially Riley Reif as of late.
So it's again, and we've talked about this before, where left guard is kind of okay, I suppose.
If you're going to hide a position, that's the one that you want to hide.
That's the one that seems easiest to hide. So I'm not that concerned about Elflein. It'd be one thing if it was like Riley Reif having a career worst season or something like that.
Right. And I think that you bring up a really important point, and that is that everyone around him has been stepping up for the most part. I mean, Josh Klein, for the amount that the Vikings are paying him, I'm very satisfied with what he's brought to the line when he's been able to be active. You look at Brian O'Neill, who just allowed his first sack, I believe, right? They did end up crediting
like that. I don't know if they credited with him or credited for him.
It sure looked like
there was a couple times that it looked like it was his pressure, his sack. But either way, the fact that he hadn't the whole season,
right,
plus
that's the point
last
here.
season, that's the point, is that he's been rock solid.
So he's been outstanding. Now you have Riley Reif over the past 2 weeks, who has been, by the eye test for me, very, very good. From Pro Football Focus has shown an increase in his rating, so if you're into that. And the overall pressures that he's allowing are simply, they're lower. That's just stats for you. Straight up stats. And he's playing better. And then you got Bradbury, who, by all accounts, looks considerably better than the guy who didn't look like he even belonged in the NFL the first couple of weeks, at least as a pass protector. So overall, I mean, you got to be very happy with this front 5. And if the biggest problem is Pat Elflein right now, I think that the Vikings probably have bigger issues that they can address in a variety of different ways, I suppose. But I'm with you. I don't think that Elflein is a huge concern. I do think that long term he might not be the answer there, though. I will say I don't think that he's going to ever be the all-pro that a lot of us thought he might be coming out of Ohio State. Or like, the steady starter. I remember seeing draft reports like
that's fair to question that for sure.
I don't think he's that anymore. I do love him though. He's a great personality, and I hope he gets back to being who he was pre-injury. But I think that was a pectoral injury, right? I think that really messed with his ability to perform at this level, because when you get hurt, you end up dropping a bunch of weight, and then he was already underweight. So then he didn't have the offseason to put on muscle. He was busy rehabbing his injury, and I just really think that it's threw his whole career like for a loop. If we ask him 10 years down the road now, I think that he will point to that injury as being kind of at the very least, kind of a down point in his career because of what he lost from that. So on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, the Vikings end up only allowing 9 points. They have the number 3 ranked defense in total defense. They've been outstanding overall. The other concern falls squarely on the guy who's getting paid, I believe, the most money on this entire defense right now, and that is Xavier Rhodes, the cornerback. Mm-hmm. Now, the rest of the defense has been playing pretty well. The biggest question marks, and the reason why the Vikings, I believe, are ranked outside the top 10 in pass defense, are because of the 2 cornerbacks, Rhodes and Waynes. But the problem that most people have is that Waynes, you can kind of expect, some ups and downs, I suppose. That's just kind of who he's been. But ultimately, you're satisfied with his performance. With Rhodes, we saw 2017 Xavier Rhodes, and maybe we got spoiled. So we expect shut down Xavier Rhodes because we saw it for 16 straight games, right? That's where we're at with Xavier Rhodes in terms of, fan feeling about the guy. He's also, been around for the entire Zimmer era. He's been one of Zimmer's guys, so I think we all have this kind of intimacy with Xavier Rhodes that we may not have with other players. So to see him floundering the way he is, and it's not even that he's playing that bad, by the way. He's not. He really isn't. He's just not shutting players down, and he's allowing touchdowns. But like when he went up against Julio Jones, no one had a problem with his performance then. It's just he's having these stupid penalties that he's getting again. That's a real concern I think I have, because he was very penalty prone early in his career, and he's kind of got that figured out. But then in terms of his overall coverage, you hate to see kind of the replay happen, because like Terry McLaurin made him look really bad on one play. Like really bad. Like I believe he broke in and then came back out, and Rhodes went spin cycled. And it's like you see that and everyone immediately goes, rookie wide receiver, can't be happening, but they don't realize that you're dealing with Terry McLaurin here, who might be, one of the best rookie receivers of all time based off of his performance through 8 weeks in a terrible offense. So, I mean, I don't know. That leads to you here. I mean, what do you think about Xavier Rhodes? Where are you at with him?
I mean, I'm with you in that it's not that bad. He's not costing you the team games. He's not allowing like hundreds of yards in a game. It's the penalties, I think, are the main issue.
It's the first downs that are bothering people, I think.
The penalties are bringing sort of a bigger light to the issue than maybe that there is in terms of his coverage anyway. It's just teams are attacking him down the field because they know that he sticks to his guy 20 plus, 30 plus yards down the field, and he's not afraid to kind of get physical when the ball's in the air. That can draw penalties. I think teams are actually aware of that, and they're taking those shots. But in terms of his ability to stick with his guy and close on routes and keep things in front of him on the shorter stuff, I think he's been really good at that. It's not like he allowed a big play to McLaurin per se. It's not like the 20, 30-yard game.
I'm telling you, it's the replay. It's when you see the view that only the fan can see watching TV, where they slow it down and it looks really bad. And then I'm just saying you connect the dots, and then all of a sudden you get to this point where you're talking about rookie receiver Burns all-pro cornerback, and you're not even really.
Well, yeah, I think people forget too that cornerback is a position that's inherently like
going to lose 50%.
You're supposed to I mean, if you're allowing 50% completion, that's probably pretty good, right? Because I mean, just think about. You're supposed to copy what the receiver's running, essentially. You're supposed to follow him, but at the same time, you don't know what's going to happen. So your reaction time,
you got to be a step ahead of something.
You have to be a step ahead of the guy that you don't know. Yeah, you don't know where he's going. And so when Rhodes had a season like 2017, that should be treated as something that rarely happens in the NFL. It's rare, extremely rare, where guys like Richard Sherman, guys like that come around and they can do it for multiple seasons. And Xavier Rhodes able to do it for one season, and if he's still able to play at a high level, not quite the elite All-Pro level of 2017, but if he's able to stick around at a high level, a top 20 cornerback level, something like that, where he's one of the kind of upper echelon of total starters in the league, that's very welcome by me, and I think it fits in well with the Vikings defense because of all the pieces around him.
Yeah, I'm with you overall. I don't think it's that bad. I think that he's definitely lost a step.
That happens too.
That's kind of normal. Yeah.
A cornerback especially, once you lose a step, it's noticeable. Again, because of the quickness and the instincts that you need to follow a guy where a player in front of you, one of the best athletes in the world, and you don't know where they're going to run.
Right.
And they can use head fakes. They can use their quickness to get out in front of you and trying to stay with them step for step. The idea and in theory, it's supposed to be impossible. And the fact that these guys can, at all in some scenarios is remarkable.
Yeah. The one thing that I will say to keep an eye on is when you're breaking this down in your head, when you're breaking down the performance of Xavier Rhodes, your personal rating of him, right? Keep an eye on the difference between when he's in press coverage and when he's in off coverage. Because I think a lot of the heat that Rhodes gets is when he's in off coverage, and that is a coaching error if the ball ends up being a first down. Mm-hmm. So, for example,
if it's 3rd and 4 and McLaurin runs a 6-yard hitch and
he's playing 8 yards off the line of scrimmage, that's on Zimmer. So just keep this in mind, because there's a lot of people that are saying that Zimmer is like babying him too, because he's like always defending him, but he's actually like it's not coach speak. He's telling you the truth. That's the best way to put it. 3rd and 6, and Rhodes lines up 8 yards off the line of scrimmage, and they throw a curl. That's on Zimmer. If it's 3rd and 6 and Zimmer and Rhodes is in press coverage at the line of scrimmage and he gets beat on, a quick slant, that's on Xavier Rhodes. There's a difference here. So I'm just saying, when you're evaluating Rhodes' performance specifically moving forward, keep an eye out for that difference, because that ultimately is, press coverage is a big piece of who Xavier Rhodes is. That's where he thrives. And when he's not in press, he's a little bit more susceptible.
And around the league, you notice how much coaches, defensive coordinators, whatever it is, are afraid of getting beat deep, because you see so many times a 3rd and 5, 3rd and 3, whatever it is,
right.
And guys are playing 8 yards off, where smart offenses will just chuck it outside, half a second after taking the snap, and they'll get a first down out of it. And a lot of times that's not on the DB, or that's not, they can't really do anything about that.
Right.
So that is a good point. That's something to watch. And I think there are times when the Vikings are guilty of that. But I think the Vikings are a lot better at that. Zimmer and George Edwards and company are a lot better at that than a lot of other teams in the league, because I've seen so many of those errors. Even yesterday, the Chiefs game, the Packers had a 3rd and 5 to put the game away, and the linebacker on Aaron Jones is 8 yards off the line of scrimmage. They throw a quick out, game's over. Stuff like that.
That's exactly what I was thinking about when you were explaining this.
Yeah, that's a coaching error. Get your guy up in line of scrimmage, and if you get beat deep, it's the same thing as getting beat for an 8-yard gain. So I don't know. That's more of a coaching thing, like you said. But overall, Xavier Rhodes, I'm not that displeased at this point. It'd be something if we get a performance where he 2 or 3 penalties down the field, or over 100 yards allowed, something like that, then we can have a real major concern.
Sure. As far as his playing time goes, though, Holton Hill does return, first and foremost. So
that's a good point.
The Vikings do have more options here. I've seen people call for Mike Hughes getting more snaps so that Rhodes is, I guess, fresh, and he's not playing as many snaps per game. And with Holton Hill returning, you obviously have another guy that you have some confidence in. It remains to be seen how good Holton Hill still is. This is an interesting situation where he comes off of a solid, if not very good, rookie year, and then he misses the first 8 games of his sophomore year. It's tough to tell where he's going to be at. I'm not going to say one way or another on Holton Hill until I see him play. All I can say is that this is a guy that you were confident in last year, and he's returning. But for me, I'm open to the idea of Rhodes handing off some snaps to Mike Hughes, just because I've become increasingly confident in Mike Hughes, and I can admit that Rhodes shows some signs of being a veteran. Now, is that major concern? No, it's just I don't think that we'll ever see 2017 Rhodes again, and I think that Mike Hughes is getting better by the week, and I would like to see more of him. That's kind of where I stand on this corner.
Well, I think it's unfair to expect 2017 Rhodes again. Right. I mean, and we can say that in hindsight, and it sounds like we're smart to say that, but at the time, you see a guy with that kind of performance, and he gets he was literally named All-Pro at 2 different positions. I think he was defensive back on the second team, and then like cornerback on the first team. That doesn't happen very often. So I think we kind of had expectations in 2018, had some injury issues throughout the season, and then 2019, but fair. But then 2019, expecting a rebound, and to expect that type of from anybody in the league. It doesn't have to be Xavier Rhodes. It could be any cornerback, you name him. To have that kind of performance for a whole season is just not a fair expectation. So Rhodes he's fine right now, and I don't think it's. I mean. Is it disappointing? Maybe, but it's not a concern.
Sure. Okay, so last thing before we jump into Skol Scale here. Over the weekend, J-Ron Kearse, safety, nickel back, money backer, toy for Mike Zimmer.
Large person.
Yeah, large Terminator. Was arrested on suspicion of DUI and also a unauthorized weapon charge, which is not great. So, I'm not going to break down this legally or criminally. I'm not going to talk about any of that. I don't care about that. My one question on this subject is simply, what happens with J-Ron Kearse here? Are the Vikings? Is this kind of like you've been a good dude since you've been here, and don't let this mistake happen again. You'll be punished accordingly by the NFL, and that's that, and then you'll be back. Or is this a situation where this is a guy who has lost playing time in the last couple of weeks? He's been irrelevant to the Vikings defense basically since Mike Hughes returned. It's a situation where you part ties with a guy who's kind of, got himself into trouble and isn't that important to your team anymore. So it's just kind of a PR move.
I disagree a lot with the fact that he's not important, because he is the special teams captain at this point. So, from that perspective, I think they're going to try and keep him. And the fact that they let Holton Hill get suspended twice and they didn't get rid of him tells me that they're going to be patient about this, and they're going to give J-Ron every chance possible to get back, because he's not playing the role on defense anymore with Hughes back, and that's all fair. And I mean, for what it's worth, he was dominant early on in the season and in preseason. Like he looked like kind of the next.
Very good.
He looked like kind of the guy we would want to replace Anthony Harris if and when he gets paid by somebody else after this season. Given how they handled Holton Hill, it would surprise me if they cut bait with him, and especially the fact that he is the special teams captain right now. That would really surprise me if they just got rid of him, and I don't know what kind of suspension would come down on him for this.
It's 1 or 2 games, I think, for a first offense, something like this.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly, and if maybe the firearm plus the DUI is adds on to it. I'm not sure, but I would imagine they're going to wait it out and save a roster spot for him when he's back.
Yeah, that's sort of my expectation too. I mean, it's not like he didn't do something. Now, I'm going to say this. Drinking and driving is incredibly stupid. Never do it for sure. Do not agree with that decision at all. Okay? We got that disclaimer out the way? Okay. So, he didn't do anything horrible here. He made a very stupid mistake that a lot of people
It's not horrible by NFL standards.
Yes. And it's not horrible by human being
NFL standards set are very different than the standards for you or me.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I got
Tyreek Hill is still playing in the NFL, right?
Right.
Tyreek Hill, Joe Mixon, they're still playing in the NFL.
And Dante Stallworth, that whole thing with his DUI, yeah. I mean...
So those guys can still play in the NFL. J-Ron Kearse absolutely still can.
That's kind of where I'm at too. I don't think he did anything egregious. It's just it's obviously very stupid, and in most people's lives it would be catastrophic, but because of who he is to the Minnesota Vikings organization,
it's much more forgivable than what we've seen before. The NFL forgive before.
That's true. So basically what it comes down to is there's precedent to suggest that J-Ron Kearse will live through this one. That's basically what it comes down to. Regardless of where we stand on the actions, regardless on his importance, I just don't think it's that big of a deal relative to what has happened, even in the last 6 months in the NFL. But it definitely sucks, and it was a very poor decision, and obviously I hope that that kind of thing does not plague the Vikings, because we've seen what it has happened in the past with Vikings teams having some interesting off-field excursions, and that's just not great for anyone involved. So
it's entertaining for those that are not Vikings fans.
That's definitely true. So hopefully the Vikings will figure that out with Jaron Kearse. I don't think that factors too much into the Skol Scale.
No, I don't think so.
Which is a perfect segue into the Skol Scale.
That was a really good segue. That was all you.
A+. So why don't you tell me where you're at?
What was I at last week? I don't even remember. I never forget what
you said 7.5 last week.
7.5. Okay, I'm gonna stay at 7.5 then, because I mean, straight up, a win at home against a 1-5, 1-6 team now doesn't do a lot for me.
Right. It shouldn't,
and it really won't ever. I guess the one positive I'll take from it is that Kirk had a mistake-free primetime game, and I guess if you want to say a little bit like of the sort of the extra spotlight on him for the revenge game narrative, whatnot, I don't think that mattered to him. I really don't think he was thinking about it, but yeah, I guess 7.5 is where I'm going to stay, because that's a game the Vikings should win. They need to win, and I'm not worried about the fact that they didn't blow them out of the water. I'm not worried about any of that. They went in, they won as quick as they possibly could, and they left the stadium. Like that's what they should have done against a team like Washington. So
right,
no bumps or drops in the Skol Scale. I'm at 7.5 still.
Yeah, I was at 8.5 last week, and I'm just going to sit at 8.5. I'm with you on everything you just said about how this game doesn't really do anything either way. I mean, obviously, if you lose that game, it's a big problem. But if you win it, like, unfortunately, this is like the Vikings playing the Redskins is like when the Gophers play like San Diego State. It's like you expect to win. Like, that's just, you're a Big Ten team, you're playing a, quote, inferior opponent, so when you lose, it's a really big deal and everyone goes crazy. But when you win, it's just like, okay, on to the next one. When does Wisconsin come to town? That's kind of how I feel about this Vikings-Redskins matchup, where it's like they played well enough to win. It would have been cool to see them blow them out, but, I mean, even then, like, I don't think I would have seen any real jump from my Skol Scale. I'm very optimistic about this team. I believe this team can beat basically anyone. And by the way, there's a couple of these teams that are ahead of the Vikings that I don't, even though their record suggests they're very good, I'm not fully, like, I don't really see it quite yet. Like, I think they have ways to be exposed.
San Francisco and Green Bay.
Yeah, for sure, those two teams. Absolutely. So that's just like, I'm still very optimistic, but I also, as a Vikings fan, you take these things week by week. I'm definitely enjoying the process here, because we're finally starting to see some improvement from Cousins, and that's made this whole experience as a Vikings fan a lot more enjoyable altogether. But this one it's not going to bump me up. It's not going to, and it's not going to, like, I'm not going to just choose to drop it down just because they only beat the Redskins by 12 and didn't cover. Like, I didn't have money on the game, so it doesn't faze me. So, I mean, that's basically where I stand on this one. I think the Vikings are basically the same team as they were when they went into that game. I don't know why people were freaking out about, maybe if the red zone issues kind of continue, I could see a problem. But
I don't think that was due to moving the ball or play calling or anything like that. I think it was just a couple of mistakes here and there with penalties and whatnot, kind of drove the ball back and created second and third and long. And there you're limited anyway against any defense in the NFL. Doesn't matter if it's Washington or New England. So that doesn't seem like, that seems like it's less likely to become a trend than the fact that they have been scoring lots of touchdowns recently and moving the ball well still. Like, they still move the ball really well against Washington. They just didn't quite punch it in. It was a short week. They didn't have one of their top three playmakers on offense. Doesn't seem like it's too much of a concern for me. But
what did our lovely, thoughtful, successful, and wonderful listeners have to say about their Skol Scale?
Let's get to those. First one from Bubka at Bubka2K5, always responding to us. Appreciate those responses. He says he remains at an 8, so he's kind of like us, where his number isn't changing based on a win against Washington. He says he's not worried about the sluggish play due to the game being on a Thursday night, and saying those always suck. Next 2 weeks will tell if the Vikings are Super Bowl contenders or destined to lose in the first round of the playoffs. On the bright side, he seems pretty convinced that they will be in the playoffs because they did not give the option of the Vikings missing the playoffs. So
that's kind of where I'm at too right now. I feel that. Like, I think that this is definitively a playoff team. Now let's see how good of a playoff team they can be. And I'm in full agreement with that response, because whether Pat Mahomes plays or not next week, you'll be playing against a very proficient offense. We saw that on Sunday night, the way that Andy Reid had Matt Moore prepared, which is just outstanding, by the way. You're going to get the same type of player. That's a real coaching staff and a real team, Pat Mahomes or not. And then the following week you get Dallas, and that to me will say everything or nothing about it's going to say everything about this team. And until then we can only wait. So I feel that
true.
For sure.
How about this one from at Mr. Minnesota? He says 10 out of 10, bring on Bama. Which
yeah, he thinks that we're world beaters, and I don't like.
Here's the thing. Now, people are. I think right now the equivalent of Bama in the NFL is New England, right?
Right.
New England hasn't beaten anybody this year, like at all. There's not a clear-cut best team in the NFL right now. There's not, and I think it's very possible that the Vikings could be that team. New England, Minnesota, New Orleans,
Kansas City,
San Francisco,
when Mahomes
Green
comes
Bay.
back.
Kansas City when Mahomes is back. I think that's about it.
And you have Seattle and Baltimore right there too, that are
Seattle.
in some.
Yeah, probably Seattle up there too. But I mean, like I think the way I'm going to take this response we got is bring on. It's like he said, bring on Bama, bring on whatever the best option there is in the NFL. I don't think there is one, and I think it's possible the Vikings could be that. It's also possible that the Vikings are nowhere near that. But I just look at it, and I don't think there's a clear-cut best team in the NFL right now.
Yeah, and if there is, I think the Vikings could beat them. So
yes, or the Vikings are in the conversation to be that team.
Yeah, there just isn't any team right now that really scares me other than New England's defense. And like you said, they haven't played anyone. Their offense isn't that good.
No, it's not.
One of my buddies was texting me yesterday. Because he has New England's D in fantasy football, and we're playing.
They're like the number 6 overall player in fantasy football this year.
Right. But he's texting me and he's sending me all this crap because New England keeps scoring touchdowns and Baker Mayfield is just handing it to the base of the defensive line. So I'm getting all this, and and then finally, like when they kind of leveled off, he finally starts responding like, Patriots offense isn't that good. Like Sony Michel looks like a fullback. Tom Brady looks old, still good at football, but looks like an older version of himself. He's not better. I don't like when Kirk Cousins plays well. He's definitely not like. I don't think he's Kirk Cousins like at that level. I don't think he can hit that level.
Kirk Cousins right now is better than 43-year-old Tom Brady is. I mean,
I feel comfortable. I'm okay with that. On most days, he does not have the decision making, the awareness, or the clutch gene.
If you watch a Patriots game, Brady misses a bunch of like routine throws,
he does.
all the time.
He does
all the time. They're going to play they got the Ravens, I think, next week at Baltimore. That's going to challenge them a lot.
San Francisco is another one too. I think they're exploitable as well. The way that San Francisco plays with Garoppolo,
their defense is
lights out. Absolutely, but their offense.
Jimmy G's not that good either.
Right. So, all right.
All right, we got one more here from JRav at JRav426. Expectations are around a 7 to an 8, but my optimism is at a full-blown 10. These kinds of seasons are usually far and few between. Plus, they're one of the best. They have one of the best records in football. You have to enjoy these moments while we have them. So it's kind of like a positive and negative outlook on this franchise because like. On one hand, he's saying that these things never happen, which isn't necessarily.
I don't think that's true, though.
They're what are they? The top 5 winning.
They
franchise?
win. They have been winning basically since I cared about this team. There are bumps in the road. There is 2010. There is 2012. There is last year. I mean, there's been clear disappointments, but like the Vikings have never been.
I feel like most seasons at this time of the year. I mean, they're always over. Kind of they're in the playoff hunt. Yeah. I can't remember the last time. Maybe 2011. Yeah, it was probably 2011. Was the last time we were at week 8 and we weren't even thinking about playoffs.
Yeah.
So they're always kind of in it. And then it gets to week 15, 16, 17 when, like he's saying, or well, not him, but others are saying, when are they going to collapse? When is everything going to go wrong for this team?
And the Vikings always seem to have great players too. Like at the very least, they're always entertaining. You know what I mean? Like they always have a Dalvin Cook or an Adrian Peterson, a Randy Moss. You know, they had the one year,
Jared Allen.
They had the 1 year where there was like the Travis Taylor show, but other than that, like it's been we've been pretty
2005 maybe.
Yeah, we've been blessed with a lot of talent. So at the very least, this team's always been entertaining. I said to one of my buddies on Thursday, I said, "What if we were Cincinnati Bengals fans? Just imagine that. Like, there's just not that much hope there.
The thing about
they make the playoffs and lose.
They made the playoffs all those years. They didn't win a game,
but they're never great. They're never great.
Right, never great.
Like at least the Vikings are considered to be great and then fall short of expectations. Like imagine being a Bengals fan, you never even get those expectations.
Or how about being a Browns fan, where for how many years you don't win any games, and then this year you have expectations, and now you're 2-6.
Yeah. I like being a Vikings
6
fan.
5, whatever it is. But
I'm
anyway.
with this guy. I feel this. So, and that's the end of the Skol Scale, right?
Yeah. One thing I will note, I want to add in the Skol Scale kind of part of things, the fact, we've talked about it before, but the tiebreakers with Green Bay, that's tough because the Vikings at this point, if they win out and they're 14-2, they could still, even with the win against Green Bay, in theory they could be 14-2 and be a wild card team because the Packers would have that tiebreaker at 14-2 and would probably be number 1 or number 2 overall seed in the NFC, but the Vikings would be going on the road to a solid contending NFC team.
The Packers need to lose an NFC. They need to lose an NFC game. Ideally, the Bears or the Lions. Yeah, that basically needs to happen. Yeah, we're in a weird position if the Vikings finish
like
the tide.
The Packers need to basically at this point. The Packers need to lose a couple games.
Yeah, and I think it's going to happen. I think it will. I believe it.
You think it will?
Yeah, I think
I'm not
happen.
as optimistic about that, but
fair enough. All right, let's talk some Timberwolves basketball. And by let's talk, I mean Drew talked to me about the Minnesota Timberwolves, who stand at 3-0, and as of this recording, have the best record in the Western Conference, and I believe the best record in the entire NBA.
They do.
And Karl-Anthony Towns looks like an MVP candidate. He's scoring 32 a game.
He just won the Western Conference Player of the Week award, first one of the season.
So everything possible, like there's literally nothing bad about the Wolves right now.
No, if you would have asked me this question last night with like 5-6 minutes left in the game, I would have said that the clear and glaring concern is Andrew Wiggins. And then he decides to rip off 16 points in the final 6 minutes, carry the Wolves to a win over the Heat, buries 3 threes in a row, and all of a sudden we're talking about a whole new Andrew Wiggins who can be a closer, can be a great complement to Karl-Anthony Towns. So, it's stupid early to be discussing like playoffs and all that stuff because this is 3 games and they were against rather weak opponents.
You know that we're going to talk about that stuff.
Yeah, obviously. Because, look at the Warriors now. They look really, really bad, but I'm sure by the end of the year, the Warriors will have 15 more wins than the Wolves. But it's the one thing I really need to mention is the way that Ryan Saunders and his staff have made this a team. Like it's a modern team now, where way less mid-range shooting, a lot of threes, and a lot of shots in the paint. That's the way basketball should be now with the 3-point line, mathematically, analytically, however you want to look at it. That's the most efficient way to have an offense. And kind of the big target, has been Wiggins in terms of his tendencies where he shoots a lot of mid-range shots. Those are going down. So I think that's the big difference. I think offensively you'll see the efficiency go way up just because of that change in philosophy.
He's definitely Wiggins, by the way. He's definitely taking that extra step back and making his long-range twos count for threes instead, which I will take him missing a couple extra shots if it means that you're getting the 3-point attempt.
Yeah.
So to catch you up to speed, this is what I contribute to the Wolves, by the way. It's basically reading offline for you. To catch you up to speed, if you have not been paying attention to the Timberwolves yet this season, they are 3-0. They have beaten the Brooklyn Nets in Brooklyn, which is an impressive win. That was kind of, I think the moment that stands out there is when Josh Okogie ends up shutting down Kyrie Irving on a game-winning attempt, something that you would not expect from Wolves basketball players, and definitely as
Okogie though has that in him.
He seems to. He's been able to do it with James Harden and now Kyrie Irving, but the fact that they were playing on the road, Irving scored 50 points and the Wolves still pulled away, that shows progress to me. Then they go to Charlotte, play on the road once again, and the Hornets are... I think they're a middle-of-the-road team, but if you're a good team, you beat down on Charlotte, and that's exactly what the Timberwolves did.
This is true.
And then finally you get to the Heat where Jimmy Butler does not play, which... that would have been fun, obviously. But the Andrew Wiggins show took over down the stretch, and they end up getting a 7-point victory at home for their home opener, and now stand at 3-0. So that's where the Timberwolves stand. You already mentioned Wiggins. Let's talk about Karl-Anthony Towns.
Yeah.
Offense looks even better, and more impressively, possibly, his defense seems to have improved as well.
I wish I could credit who this was, but I saw somebody tweet about how Karl-Anthony Towns is playing like Giannis, but with a 3-point shot. And if you think about it in that perspective, like obviously, again, 3 games, and I think in theory, last night was a rough shooting night for him, but he was 4 for 11, which is 36%, which is like still above average in terms of, the league, and especially for big men. So the fact that he can shoot so efficiently from outside, and he's obviously evolving in terms of his post-up game, and he now has a face-up game where he can take you off the dribble, really take any person taller than 6'8" off the dribble to the lane. He's a nightmare. And if he keeps shooting this efficiently, especially, like it's going to be, it's impossible to defend him. Like I think it was Zach Lowe from ESPN. He said a 30-12-4, 30 points, 12 boards, 4 assists average is very, very realistic for him, which would be, I think that's the first time that's ever happened.
So is he better than Kevin Garnett?
Oh, no. We got a long ways to go there defensively, but offensively, Karl is as talented, I think, as KG, if not maybe more, just because of his outside shooting.
So tell me about that defense. Why is it that Karl-Anthony Towns? Obviously, so here's my thing that's always been with him is that everyone always talks about his offensive game is outstanding. He can really only get better. He's already among the league's best, but then everyone always immediately jumps to well, his defense is subpar at best. And I look at him and I see this guy who's 7 feet, probably, if he's huge, right? And he's extremely athletic. He's got a long arm span. He's smart. He's charismatic. He's got all these great personal qualities that would, in my opinion, make him very coachable. Why is it that his defense has never been able to follow where his offense is? And then, part 2 to that question is, what are we seeing so far this year that suggests that this is sustainable and that he can actually be a average to above average defensive player?
I think there's a couple of things that I can point to. I think one is pick and roll. I think when his man sets a screen on the pick and roll, I think there are lots of times where he gets lost when he's kind of in between, kind of in no man's land between helping out the guy with the ball and then kind of sagging back and defending the roll. He kind of gets lost in between those two, and that can create easy buckets for the opposition. I think the other one is when he goes up against bullies, if you will, kind of the players that won't necessarily beat you with
like physical
moves,
players,
but rather than they'll
like
kind of
Rasheed
bully
Wallace.
Andre Drummond in the past. I think last year Cat got the best of him for the most part, but Andre Drummond's been a guy. Blake Griffin's been one of those. There are guys like that where I think have just out-muscled him a few times, caused problems for him. But I think he's matured a little bit now, and I think he's playing better against those guys now. So I think those are the 2 things that I would watch for moving forward into the season, specifically the pick and roll, and then kind of defending against bigger, stronger, more physical players like those guys. But I think another impact too here is Robert Covington, Rilco. He was missed, or he didn't play a lot last year at all. He's a defensive, mastermind really in terms of knowing where to be and also executing perimeter defense, help defense, whatever it is. He does all of it, and he can basically defend every position on the floor. So I think just having him out there inherently places everybody in better position, not just Cat.
Yeah, Covington being the centerpiece of that Jimmy Butler trade last year. I've always been intrigued by his ability. Everything everyone says about him is that he's just a great, like a great piece of the puzzle, right? Like a very important piece to like a good team has a Robert Covington type player. Defensively sound, smart with the basketball, kind of a leadership guy, and he's shown that through 3 games, I think. Again, I can't offer too much, introspective analysis on his performance, but I do like him as a player. Then you've got a couple of these role players too here that I think are very interesting. Shabazz Napier being the one that interests me personally the most, because I liked Napier a bunch in college, and I thought that
he's basically playing the Tyus Jones role, except for like $7 million cheaper, which is really nice. And and if you put it that way, it kind of makes Tyus Jones out to be the bad guy, which is definitely not the case. He just kind of, it was his turn to make a big contract,
and you take that money every time.
Yeah, he went and got that money with Memphis, so you can't really blame him for that. But Napier is playing a very similar role, and he's doing it, almost in the same fashion Tyus did. So that's really nice. Just smart player, doesn't turn it over a lot, kind of runs the offense and keeps the team on the same page. So that's what you want out of a backup point guard, really. And he's able to do that. So I like it. And then I think Okogie's a big one too. And Jarrett Culver, obviously.
Does Okogie count as a role player at this point, though? Because I think that he has kind of solidified himself as.
It depends on what you. Yeah, I think he's one of those guys where if you lose a guy to an injury, one of the starting guys, Graham, Covington, Teague, whoever it may be, for like a game or two, you're definitely confident Okogie can go in there. He can defend a 2 or a 3 and do it really well. He brings that he's almost intimidating now as a defender.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to get up in your face and make you think about things.
He's also got names on his list too. When you start getting those names on your list, all of a sudden people are talking about you, and you find out how great of a defender you are, and it looks like.
And his offensive game is evolving too. He's a lot more efficient than he was last year, at least than the first 3 games. So
and that was the biggest question mark with him coming in, right? Is whether he could develop an offensive game to compete with his defensive game.
Yeah, and he's not as much of a shooter per se, but I think his scoring ability, like off the dribble and whatnot, has looked pretty good so far.
Then you've also got Jake Layman and Noah Vonleh, it's funny that they have some of these guys, because I remember watching them in college specifically. Like Noah Vonleh was, when I was at Marquette, Noah Vonleh was at Indiana, and I just remember specifically watching him. And I remember being interested in that signing. You're also the point that I'm ramping up to, the point that you guys care about, is that you're getting great bench performance from, Layman, Vonleh, Travion Graham, who I don't know a thing about. I've never even heard of him, to be honest, but you're getting production from him as well. The Wolves never really have had a bench. It's basically been Karl-Anthony Towns and hope that Wiggins can kind of play too. They're getting real production from these guys, these 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
The bench has been really good. They're not like so many times in the past, a couple years, especially when it was the Towns, Wiggins, Butler era.
Right.
A lot of times that starting group would just dominate, right? And then they'd bring the bench in, and quickly that lead would disintegrate. And I think that might be, there's a lot more balance, at least. Culver, is a huge boost defensively.
I love Culver.
A lot of these guys are just long, and they play defense, which is huge, because I think the bench in the past, the bench players have not been as sound defensively, and that's been a big problem in terms of getting, either having a lead and or having a deficit to face and letting that expand, or having a lead and letting that diminish. So, overall, a lot to be excited about. Again, it's very early, so you want to manage those expectations, but it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool being 3-0, and I didn't expect that. So,
speaking of managing expectations, we're going to do the opposite of that. This is the first time we've talked about the Timberwolves on the show, so I want us on record here. One, is this a playoff team? They can be an 8 seed. That doesn't matter. But is this a playoff team, which is something that is rare in Minnesota Timberwolves basketball? And B, do you see Andrew Wiggins truly taking the next step this year? Or is this kind of flash in the pan, what we saw most recently from him?
I'm going to say no from the playoff team, just because the West is so loaded with good teams, and they've played 3 Eastern Conference teams so far. Right. And I think it's it's been unbalanced in the past in terms of West versus East, but I think it's even more unbalanced now. So I'm going to say no for that reason. I think if they're in the East, they're a playoff team, though. And then for Wiggins, I want to say yes, I really do. But he was 0 for 10 on the season from 3 before he went and made, I think, those 4 in a row at the end of last night. So I need to see more consistent outside shooting from him first. But that was really nice to see him kind of have that sort of closer performance. It's been a while since we've seen that from him, where he kind of takes over the game and really decides the game based on his performance in a 2 or 3 minute stretch. That's the kind of stuff that we expected eventually to see from him when he was drafted. It's kind of taken a while for him to get there, and obviously the addition of Butler and Cat kind of taking some of that, taking the ball away from him a little bit has impacted that. But to have that option and just to have a guy confidently want those shots is really nice.
I'm going to go no on both of them as well. I am in the I'll believe it when I see it camp for Andrew Wiggins. I do like him a lot, and I hope that he gets to that point. It's just that I've become jaded with Andrew Wiggins, and if I've become jaded with Andrew Wiggins, you can only imagine where I stand with my Timberwolves fandom, right? Not only am I not the biggest basketball guy in the world, I prefer hockey during the fall to winter months, but the Timberwolves have made it basically impossible to be a fan for at least a decade now. If not more, basically, with the exception of the 1 year where you had hope with Jimmy Butler, and then that fell to shit. So I'm just gonna until proven otherwise. That's where I stand on the Wolves, and I do think that eventually this honeymoon that we're having to open the year here will begin to sour, and that we won't even be considering playoffs as an option. So that's that on the Timberwolves. Sorry to end on kind of a negative note there.
It was so positive for like 95% of it.
It is fun for now, though.
Then, speaking of negative notes,
yeah,
the Minnesota Wild.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a great transition. Let's talk about the Wild here. So, the Wild, and so I'm a big hockey guy. Generally speaking, I try to watch between 60 and 70 Wild games a year. I've watched 3 this year so far. So consider my thoughts and kind of getting you up to speed here on where they stand. Take that with a grain of salt, because I'm definitely not the local Michael Russo to talk about the Wild here. But I am a big fan, and generally speaking, like I tend to have an optimistic view on the Wild, because to me this is the only sport that truly belongs in Minnesota, right? Like you think about like Texas football, or you think about California basketball. Yeah, Indiana would work as well. But you never really think of like, Minnesota being the spot for any sport other than hockey. And so I've always had that mindset that if any team is going to win in Minnesota, in an era with no salary cap in baseball, where the Vikings are consistently letting us down, and the Timberwolves have been basically, a non-factor for the majority of my life, I've always felt like the Wild are the one team that could figure this out and win a championship for the state. Now, this is like literally the worst team I've ever seen in my life. Okay? Straight up, I've never seen a worse Wild team. Period. And this is, post Gabrick, even with Gabrick a couple of those years, the Wild have had some very bad teams. This is by far the worst. They're in salary cap hell on top of that with Parise and Suter, who both look ancient, and is, extremely difficult to watch your centerpiece of your franchise just fall down the well here. And there's no positive for either of those guys. I think they're just past their prime, and that sucks, okay? So that's where I stand with those two guys. Then you've got this group of young guys, right, who are helping carry the Wild to 8 points and a 4-7 record for 6th in the Central Division. You've got Brad Hunt, who I guarantee most of this fan base has never heard of. He's leading your team in goals with 6. So that means that you're getting nothing out of the returns that you got last year when you got rid of Granlund, when you got rid of Niederreiter, all these guys that the fan base really liked, and obviously was one of the biggest reasons probably why the GM got fired last year, and we brought in a new guy. But literally, there's nothing to like about this team right now. I'm sorry, they're unwatchable in my opinion. If you're a big hockey fan, you can find little things to enjoy, but as far as I'm concerned, they're not going to compete. They don't have any exciting young players. The biggest thing that the Wild have to look forward to right now is when they get, I forgot the Russian prospect's name. Once they get him over here, that's really the best. That's the best thing that the Wild have going for them right now, and the opportunity to get the number 1 overall pick last year, which, based off of my very limited knowledge, is probably going to come from Boston College. So honestly, it might be more important to be watching Boston College to see which one of these guys you want on the Wild next year than to watch this absolute dumpster fire of a team that has like 2 redeemable assets that may or may not end up being traded by the deadline anyways. We are the Miami Dolphins of NHL hockey right now. That's where the Wild stand in my view.
Wow. I don't think I have anything to add. A, because I've watched like 10 minutes of Minnesota Wild hockey this season. But also B, I think you covered every single base possible there. And ending it with equating them to the Miami Dolphins is, I mean, I don't know how I can respond to that.
If they aren't tanking, they should be. Straight up. Okay? Like, they're... Every team goes through droughts, right? Every team. And you need to have that drought in order to, get the picks, to get the next players, to build the next team,
it's
to
the
do
cycle
all
every
these
team
things.
goes through, except for the Yankees in baseball because they have the
Money.
payroll of
So lean into it, please. Like, let's get some really high picks. Let's talk about 1s and 2s in Minnesota, because Minnesota teams are seemingly never bad enough to get that number 1 pick, except for the Twins, that one time when they got Buxton, and it hasn't really worked out. But by all means, give us more number 1 overall picks, because that's where I'm at with just don't pay for a Wild ticket. That would be my suggestion this year, unless there's a dramatic turnaround. It's just not worth it this year. Really, just wait for it, because in my opinion, the only fun player to watch on this team is Matt Dumba, and that's because he's liable to fight someone, and he also has an absolute laser from the line. So that's where I stand on the Wild.
I'm learning a lot about hockey right now.
I mean, the other redeemable players on this team, I was giving them, I was a little over dramatizing this a bit, but like you got Jonas Brodin, who's still young and can still be a great piece on your on your blue line, and then you've got Jordan Greenway, who is interesting, and you've got Jason Zucker, who basically is right now, to me, is the only guy that I trust to score the puck. And unfortunately, he hasn't done a whole lot of that so far. But he's fast, and he can be interesting in that way. But, these guys that they brought in last year, I mean, Ryan Donato's irrelevant. That trade looks awful, Like, I just don't like... Joel Eriksson Ek he hasn't been great when he's even on the ice. I just have no confidence in this team. Kevin Fiala, what has he done? We got him last year you traded 2 of the 2 of the guys that everyone liked, and you got 2 guys that no one likes. That's where the Wild is, okay? And Matt Zuccarello, what were you thinking signing here? And front office, what were you thinking giving him money when you have no money? I just don't get where this team is. Just lean into the tank. That's where I stand with the Wild, period. And I think that's...
I like it. The Minnesota Mild, if you will.
That's kind of what they've become this year. So
I did not come up with that. I saw that somewhere else. I'm sure you've seen it too. But
yeah. I mean, I think I've heard that before. But that's what they are. That's accurate. That's real. That's factual reporting. Calling them the Minnesota Mild right now. So, and that's why we don't talk about hockey too much on the show, because I don't have anything positive to say. Period. And until I do, we probably will continue to have every once in a while.
Won't be long before we're not talking about the Wolves either. So.
We'll see. Anyways, that's the end of the show for this week. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes. Give us a 5-star review if you have a free moment.
By the way, if the Steelers win tonight, me and BJ go 15 for 15 in our Week 8 NFL picks this week.
I'm very comfortable with that pick, too. So maybe going 15-0. So like the YouTube page. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. And I think that's all the stuff that you need to do. Oh, you could follow the Unbelievable Twitter account and continue to engage with us. We really appreciate that. And, I think that's all I got. Next show, we'll be talking about the Vikings in Kansas City, and then we'll make our picks. And that we'll do a standard Thursday show unless the Wolves do something nuts between, now and then. So thanks for listening as always, and we will catch you guys later on this week.